Hi, it's Joe. I'm going to do a video on how to install SSP burrs on the Turin DF64P grinder. This is also applicable to the DF64E, which is very similar to the DF64P, but the DF64E has an electronic control panel. The DF64P does not. The first thing you're going to do is remove the top burr carrier. There's an included Allen wrench. Just take the included Allen wrench, and that Allen wrench is included so that you can take this off for cleaning. If you take this off, it's not going to void warranty. Some people have some concerns about that. This is not considered dismantling the grinder. This is intended to be taken off for cleaning purposes. So you're going to loosen one side at a time. If you kind of shift this top burr carrier as you're loosening it, it can make some of the it can make the screws come out a little bit easier, because sometimes this sits in tight and it might cause pressure on the side of the screw. But if you kind of shift it, it helps. So you're going to take these two off, set them aside, and lift this up. One thing to note is there's indentations on the top of this upper burr carrier. Those indentations, when you put it back together, have to go over these screw heads. If you put it like this, it's going to cause a tilt. So these have to be over these screw heads. So there's a rotary or bottom SSP burr. Some of them they stamp it on here, rotary, some of them bottom. And you're going to want to take a look on each of them. This one is the fixed. So the fixed will go on this one. This one is the rotary. That's going to go here. So you're going to want to remove the screws that hold the stainless steel burr in place. And under the stainless steel burr, there's going to be a little seal on it. So you're going to want to be careful when you lift this up not to lose that seal. Sometimes I've seen it happen where people lift it up and the seal drops and they miss it. So you're going to want to take this seal, put it back in place, and then take your fixed SSP burr, or top, sometimes they label it top, sometimes fixed, same thing, and you're going to want to tighten this down. So as you're tightening it down, you don't want to tighten one screw at a time all the way tight. You want to put them all in first. And there's a little bit of movement on the screw heads. So you're going to look at the screw heads and kind of make sure they're centered within the holes. So make sure they're centered. If they're kind of shifted over a little bit, it can cause some alignment issues. So you want to make sure those are as straight as possible. And then you're going to tighten it kind of like you would a tire on a car, not all at once. You tighten a little bit, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. You go round and round until it's tight. And you don't want to use a drill or anything like that. That's going to cause too much pressure and it can strip out the aluminum. So you want them snugly tight, but you don't want to be cranking on the screwdriver either. So a little bit like that, that's good. Next, we're going to install the bottom one. This one is a little bit trickier to get out because as you're turning the screwdriver on the top, this is going to want to move. So what you do is you slip a flathead screwdriver in this crack, and it's gonna, you want to be careful you don't want to scratch the inside, so you kind of put it on the sweeper. There's a sweeper right there. You wedge the flathead screwdriver in there and you hold it firmly, and you turn the screwdriver to loosen the screw. Then you do the same thing on the other one. When you're taking the burr off, you're going to want to apply pressure to prevent it from moving counterclockwise. When you're installing the burr and you're tightening the screws down, you're going to flip the screwdriver the other direction. But when we're taking it off, you just loosen these up. Once they're loose, you don't need this anymore. Just loosen them all up. And it can be a little bit difficult to get this up, but you stick a screwdriver underneath there. Sometimes these screws kind of hold in place even if they're loose. So you kind of stick a screwdriver underneath and lift it up. Flip this over, take all the screws, set them aside. Make sure this seal is in position. Kind of put it in place. This is how it looks like when it's in place. If it's shifted over like that, or not, shifted like this, that's not right. You want it evenly spread around. Kind of have to move it around a little bit to get it even. Once it's in place, you take your bottom burr or your rotary burr. You can kind of take your fingers and spread it like this and slowly lower it over the screw holes. Gently lower it down. You don't want to move that seal around. And the same thing on this bottom burr. You're going to put one screw in a little bit, kind of get it going. Go to the next one, get it going a little bit. Sometimes it's a little harder to get these going because it moves. You can wedge the burr carrier, prevent it from moving. And as you're doing this, kind of shift it a bit. So we're going to do the same thing. Tighten a little bit. And as you're doing that, kind of make sure those screw heads are in the center of the holes, because you don't want it to be mounted, shifted off to one side. So you kind of go back and forth, tighten it up. And again, this is going into aluminum, so you don't want to use a screwdriver or a drill on this. You just want to tighten them in by hand. Don't use any power tools to tighten this. Make sure this is nice and snug. I've seen it a few times where these screw heads are not tightened enough. I've also seen it where they're tightened too much. So you want it snug, but you don't want it loose. You don't want any movement, but you want it so you want it tight enough where there's no movement, but you don't want to over tighten it and really crank on them. So once those are in place, you're going to take this lever at the bottom of the grinder and make sure it's moved all the way over to the highest grind size possible. And the reason is these stainless steel burrs are very slightly thinner than the SSP burrs. The SSP burrs are slightly thicker. So we don't want to tighten it all the way down when this burr is too high up. It's going to cause a lot of pressure between the burrs. So you're going to want to move it all the way over to 55, which is the largest setting on here. And then again, make sure these indentations, they're indentations, and there's two screws. Line those up and make sure that these holes are lined up with these holes. You want it nicely lined up. You can look down in there and make sure the holes are lined up. Once they are, you're going to take these screws and put them back in. So once you get them kind of threaded part way, then you're going to start going back and forth. And as you're doing it, kind of shift the upper burr carrier around so we're not applying too much pressure on the screws. So now we're at a point where we go back and forth. Tighten a little bit. Tighten a little bit. Same on the other side, back and forth. And again on these, you don't want to sit here and like wrench it super tight or anything like that. You want it snug where you get a little bit of movement, but you don't want to crank hard on this. I've had people that put this back together and they wrench hard on it and it ruins the threads. If those threads are ruined, it's going to ruin the threads in the body too, and you're going to have a heck of a lot of problems. So please do not do that. And that would not be considered a warranty issue. Got to be careful when you're threading these things in. So once this is done, you can kind of feel in here if the burrs are touching, and it looks like they are. Now that we have these burrs in place, we're going to flip this over because we got to line this. We got to set the 0 point. We got to find the 0 point for these burrs. So how we're going to do that? Going to flip it over. Have something on your countertop, like a plastic or paper towel or something like that, because we're going to lay the grinder on top of that. And I use a microfiber cloth to handle the grinders so you're not putting fingerprints all over it. There are going to be 4 screws on the bottom of this. I already removed the feet, but if you want to remove the feet, you take a flathead screwdriver and you just stick it down in the crack and lift them up. And set those off to the side, and we're going to get a Phillips head screwdriver and remove these 4 feet, or these 4 screws. So there's 4 screws in the bottom. If you have a magnetic headed screwdriver, you can kind of lift them out. Makes it easier. Going to set these aside in a safe spot. You don't want to lose them. Take your flathead screwdriver, stick it down in the crack. You want to stick it in the crack away from where the power cord is. So the opposite side of the power cord. If you stick it in the side of the power cord, you're going to have a really hard time removing this bottom base. Stick it in there, lift it up. As you're lifting it, feed the cord through this hole. Push it enough cord through the hole so that this hangs off to the side. I've already been in here, so it's already been done, but there's usually a cable tie that wraps around this black box. You're going to take a pair of scissors and snip the cable tie. It's going to be pretty tight, so you'll wedge the scissors in, snip it. Now that the cable tie is out of the way, you lift the black box up, and underneath here there's going to be a 1/2 inch nut. You're going to use a 1/2 inch nut driver and put it on the top of that nut, just like that. If this does not fit on, some nut drivers are a little thicker walled, but what you can do is there's 3 screws. 1, 2, 3. You loosen those up slightly and shift this around until it fits on there. Then you can tighten those screws back up, and you should be good to go. So once this is on here, you're going to lay it off on the side. You're going to lay it on the side just like that, and you're going to need 2 hands to do this. But one of the things I like to do is take a microfiber cloth and lay it over the top so I don't put fingerprints on the body. And you're going to loosen this. You can kind of hold this adjustment lever with your thumb while you're doing this. So you're going to loosen it. And as you're holding this, you kind of spin it one time to loosen it. Once it's loose enough, you're going to hold this to prevent this. There's a metal disc in here. You want to prevent that from moving as you're moving the lever. So you don't want that disc to move, and then you move the lever towards 0. So you kind of look down in there as you're doing it, and watch to see that that disc isn't moving. If the disc is moving, you loosen it up a little bit. If the burrs are touching too much, you want to loosen up, kind of shift that over, loosen it again, and then shift the lever over. You kind of feel in here for those burrs to stop touching. So you tighten it up, hold it over, feel for the burr spin, and you stick your thumb and your index finger in that hole, and you're spinning it on the other side of the grinder. You stick it up in here, and you're spinning that nut that's holding the burrs. So you're spinning the burrs with your fingers back and forth, or rotating it, whatever works better for you. And you're going to listen for the burrs to touch. So you kind of move the lever over, or you can shift this. Sometimes you have to shift it back and forth a little bit, but you listen for those burrs to touch. I'm hearing it right here. And once I hear it, I don't want them to touch when people are using it. So I move it slightly off the burrs touching. And you're never going to use it with the burrs touching anyway, because that is too fine for espresso. And this is an espresso grinder. So as you're spinning the burrs with this hand, you're kind of moving this lever until you hear that sound of the burrs touching. So we'll shift it slightly off so the burrs no longer touch. That's going to be our new 0 point. But this 0 point is not over here, and we need this lever over here. So what we're going to do is loosen this again, shift the lever over, and then tighten this. So we're going to watch that disc again, make sure the disc is not spinning. Loosen this up. Move the lever over, and then tighten it. Tighten it pretty good, and then do a test. Now that I tightened it, I hear the burrs touching. So I have to shift it over a little bit, and I hold this firmly, and I kind of take the lever and I apply quite a bit of pressure to shift it. It's touching a little bit. I'm going to shift this over very slightly, and then kind of force the lever so that we don't hear the burrs touching anymore. Just a little bit at a time, because you do want the burrs pretty close together. And then you tighten up on it. After you tighten up on it, you want to double check that the burrs are not touching. Lever's all the way over here. We're done. That is the 0 point on this grinder, and then we just have to put it back together. We're going to lift it up, take this black box, got to make sure that the wires are out of the way. So there's this little thing that sticks out. That's going to go down in that crack. So we're going to shift these wires out of the way and put this black box back in place. And take these wires and put them so that none of them are over the black box. You want them below the black box. Shift them out of the way. So they're all flat like that. You don't want them getting in the way when we're trying to put the cover back on, or the base cover back on. Once they're in place, we take this cord and we pull it gently through. You don't want to pull hard because it will scratch the cord. This is metal and it will scratch the cord, so you don't want to pull hard. You gently pull it in and kind of shake it a bit as you're doing it. Make sure the wires are in place. Might have to lift it up a bit. There you go. Now that it's the base is on, you can kind of keep your finger on there just so it doesn't push back up, and you're gonna tighten the base back on. Put the feet back in place. When you take these pads off, you're going to want to make sure you never touch that so you don't mess up the adhesive. Put these back in place. It's going to be 4 of them. And then you flip the grinder over. You might want to just kind of give it a spin just to make sure that the burrs are on right. And that's all there is to it. Now when you start using it, I would start with in the center. Don't use it all the way over here. The burrs are very close together and you could jam up the grinder, could clog it up. Probably not going to need to grind coffee that fine. Move it over to the center and start dialing in your shots there. Some coffees may do best at 45. Some may do best at 10 or 15. But a good place to start is in the center.